welcome to one more session on sociology or topics which are related to sociology, which are in the news or which are typically always in the news, right? So that is what we are going to do. And so before we start, some basic announcements. So the usual announcements, right? In case you need help with the preparation, where will you find these lectures? Where the recorded video will be available? So all these things are here. And if you need any help, then you can always contact the mentorship number, right? So let's get started. So what are the topics that we are going to take up today? So these are the list of topics that we are going to take up. The first topic is about population stabilization. So recently there was this news that India is going to overtake China when it comes to population, and so this is something which is kind of interesting. And population is also part of your syllabus. Like sociology paper 2, there is one section completely related to population, and it has multiple things related to population. India's population policy approaches, different kinds of demographic parameters, and analysis along those lines. All these things are part of your syllabus. So the first topic that we are going to do is this, right? India's approach to population stabilization. And here what we are going to do is we are not only going to look at India's approach, we will try to find out the similarities or differences, divergence between India and China. See, at some point of time, India and China had similar kind of demographic profile. In fact, China might have had more population than India. But over a period of time, different kinds of rules, regulations, policy approaches have been different, and now we are at different ones. So we will have that comparative analysis, and also we will look at India's policy approach. Like what has India done? What kind of policies India has had, and what is the most recent approach to population? And as we discussed, you might have heard of the news where a particular member of parliament has been talking about initiating a population control bill. Right. So again, if we know about the approaches to stabilize population, we might actually be better able to judge whether something like a population control bill makes sense or not. Right. So this is what is going to be the first topic. The next one is participation in agriculture. So men and women participation in agriculture activities in India. So you can notice that there is one term participation. But in this topic, we are not only going to talk about participation, we are also going to talk about contribution. Right, what is women's contribution to agriculture? So participation and contribution are two different things. And in fact, while we discuss this topic, I will be pointing out how participation and contribution are two different things. Also, we will see how, since women do a lot of unpaid work, it might impact their participation in different kinds of economic activities. So we will see that as well. Women carry out multiple kinds of unpaid activities, unpaid work. Right? As a result of which, their participation in economic activities gets impacted. So we will look at that. So this is something which is broadly related with sexual division of labor, patriarchy, entitlement, sexual division of labor. This is there both in sociology paper 1 as well as sociology paper 2. But we will be focusing on data related to India. So maybe it is more relevant from the sociology paper 2 perspective. Also, when we will be discussing this topic, I will be giving you different data points. Right? So some of these data points might be relevant from your exam perspective. Right? You can include some of these numbers over there. The next topic is about the middle classes. The new middle class. What is middle class? What are the different perspectives related to middle class? How do you identify what is the middle class? So we look at all these concepts here. Right? So how Weber identifies what is the middle class, how Marx identifies what is the middle class. What are the different perspectives here? Then we will talk about the middle class in India, and specifically the new middle class in India. Now, if you're talking about the new middle class, this implies that there will be an old middle class. Right? So what's the difference between old middle class and the new middle class? And in this discussion, when we discuss this particular topic, we will be referring to a bunch of recent studies on the new middle class. Right? So studies from Bengal, studies among Nayars, studies among middle classes in Bombay. So some of the recent studies, and we'll try to find out some of the features of the middle class, right? How they are possibly different from the older middle classes. But they might not be completely different from old middle classes. There might be some similarities between new middle class and old middle class. That also we'll try to focus on. Now, why are we studying middle classes? If you look at your syllabus, you will find that middle class is one of those topics that is there in sociology paper 2. And many times we have a question related to middle class. So generally, right, it is believed that middle class plays a very significant role in developing societies. Right? So emerging economies, developing societies. So many times there's a probability that you might get questions related to middle class. So that's why again we need to focus on that. The next topic is about India's manufacturing sector. Now there was this article in EPW which talks about India's policy related to manufacturing sector. We have had some major policies, and it does a critical analysis of that. So that is what we are going to discuss here. Now you might have a question. This is a sociology session. Why are we discussing about manufacturing? Now again, I want to point out one thing, that in sociology paper 2 you get these kind of questions, and in sociology paper 2 there is a section on industrialization, urbanization, and a bunch of things. Right? So from that perspective, it is relevant. Right? So when we talk about industrialization, we're talking about manufacturing sector. And again, the different models of growth that we talk about in sociology. One of the models of growth is Roscoe's model of growth, and we also talk about manufacturing sector, or how there is a transition. Right? How from one sector to another sector there is movement of resources. So from that perspective, it becomes important, and we will do a complete analysis. Right? Why manufacturing sector is important for the society, for the economy. How does India's manufacturing sector perform at this point of time? What are some of the major issues, major questions? And we will see what can possibly be done about it. Right? And we look at some of these interesting data points. Right? Where the manufacturing sector is heading. We had a policy called the national manufacturing policy some time back. What were the objectives of this policy, and how much have you achieved on those lines? So all these things we are going to talk about here. The last topic is going to be deviance. Now, this topic we are going to just talk about the concept of deviance. Right? If you look at sociology paper 1, you have one thing, murder. Right? So R.K. Martin has extensively talked about deviance. So when you study murder, you study deviance. But apart from that, there are different other theories related to deviance. Right? So Martin had a theory related to deviance, the strain theory. But apart from Martin, there are other theories also. Right? So there are different biological theories, psychological theories. So what are these theories related to deviance? What are some of the shortcomings of these theories? And what is Martin's theory related to deviance? Right? So we'll do an analysis of this entire thing in the last part. Right? So here we're just going to discuss the concept as we do in all the sessions. So this is what we are going to cover over the next 2 hours. So let's get started. The first topic, India's approach to population stabilization. Now, population is something that you have already studied in general space paper 1. But again, we will look at some more dimensions as well. Right? We'll look at some more data points. We'll look at some recent data points here. Now, why are we discussing this? So recently, a report came out, World Population Prospects 2022, and this report is saying that India is going to overtake China's population in a year's time. So in the past also there have been different kind of estimates made that India is going to overtake China's population soon, in the next 5 years, the next 10 years. But now what they're saying is the next 1 year itself, India is going to overtake China's population. So India is going to become the most populous country. So it is kind of we should actually try to look at the trajectories of both countries. Right? So what happened over a period of time? Right? From 1950s onwards, how things have panned out for both countries. Now let's look at 1950s. Right? So at this point of time, India had recently become independent. China was also a new state, or not new state, but again, at the time also it was not an advanced economy. So if you look at the 1950s, at this point of time, China's population was more than that of India, like 50% more. But if you look at their demographic profile, like many indicators, they had a similar kind of output for India as well as China. For example, at that point of time, on an average, a female in India used to give birth to 5.5 children. Right? So 5.8 children. So India's fertility rate was around 6. China's fertility rate was also 6. Right? On average, every Chinese female was giving birth to 6 children. And if you look at the infant mortality rates, it was also quite high. So 15% children were born, right? They were most likely going to die within the first year. So the infant mortality rate was high. The fertility rates were also quite high. Life expectancy wise, again, not much difference. In case of China, the life expectancy was 44 years. In case of India, it was 42 years. Again, note this point, 42 years Right now, your life expectancy will be somewhere near 70 years, right? And depending on the state that you are, right now, your life expectancy will be different, right? So if you are, let's say, if you are born in Kerala, your life expectancy will be 74, 70, something like that. So note this thing. At that point of time, the life expectancy was 42. Now, why I'm asking you to keep this in mind? There are some people who think that in the past people used to survive for a longer duration, and now people are surviving for shorter duration because of pollution, because of a bunch of other things. Right? Pollution, all these things might be correct. Maybe there's increase in pollution, other things, but we are surviving for a longer duration right now. So with time, life expectancy has been continuously increasing, and this data point tells you that. Right? In the past, people were surviving for hardly 40 years. Now people survive for, on average, they're surviving for around 70 years in India. The point to note here, the life expectancy difference between China and India was hardly 2 years. But after this point of time, what happens? In the 1950s, China is making rapid advancements. Right? So there's massive progress when it comes to health, different kinds of interventions, mechanisms they're having. But whatever rapid advances they're making, all these things are getting negated by the great leap forward that they initiated in 1952. So between 1950 to 1962, there were massive famines because of different kind of policies that they initiated, and people are dying in mass numbers. Right? So they're making advancements in health, but it is kind of nullified by some of the whimsical policy decisions at that point of time. I'll show you a graph. So the red thing is basically China's population. Blue thing is India's population. For most of the time, you will find India's population. This is India's population. This is China's population. So India's population has been less than that of China's population. Somewhere here, you will find that this trend is changing. India is overtaking China's population. And if you look at the different projections, right? So initially the gap between India and China's population is low. Over a period of time, the gap between India's population and China's population increases drastically. China's population goes down. India's population also is going down after some point of time. But India's population will continue to remain increasing for some point of time. India has a large young population right now, right? So again, they will be producing and they will have their kids. The population is going to increase. This is what is population momentum. Now, one thing you can note here, this point, right? Somewhere in that 1950 to 1962, a lot of people were right, and you can see how this becomes kind of flat. So the point here is, India and China in 1950s had similar kind of demographic profile. China's population was slightly more, but many of the social indicators or health indicators were again more or less same. What about 1970s now? In 1970s also, not much had changed initially. If you look at the fertility rate, it used to be around 5.5. So on an average, an Indian woman was giving birth to 5.5 children. On average, a Chinese woman was giving birth to 5.5 children. And the population growth rate, it was around 2.3% per year. So this is the similarity. But then these similarities, again, maybe you have similarities along these lines, but there were different other variations. For example, China's life expectancy was 10 times more than that of India. So in case of India, the life expectancy had become almost around 50 years, slightly less than 50 years, but in China it was almost around 60 years. So life expectancy was better. The infant mortality rate, child mortality rates were one-fourth that of India. Sorry, half that of India. So again, along these lines also they had by this point of time made rapid advances. And literacy among the youth also was growing at a very fast pace. Cut to 1990s, early 1990s, 1992, China achieved the replacement levels. So what is replacement level? If the fertility rate is less than 2.1, you have achieved replacement levels. Right? 2.1 is that replacement fertility rate. So if the fertility rate of a country is equal to 2.1 or it is less than 2.1, you have achieved replacement levels. That implies that your population is not going to grow. So by early 1990s, they had already achieved this. And what is the reason how they were able to achieve it? In 1990s, they came up with some aggressive population control measures, right? One child norm and other things. So their fertility rate had become 2.1 already by 1990s. In case of India also, we have had some stringent measures, right? During the time of the emergency specifically, there were different kinds of harsh sterilization programs. But in case of India, what happened was the outputs were achieved. That means sterilization numbers were achieved. But the outcome you could not get. I mean, population growth rate did not reduce because of all the measures that were taken during the time of emergency. So this is how things look like. Now, apart from that, there were some other differences as well, right? So some qualitative differences. Now, if you notice, the recent findings that we have, the National Family Health Survey data, for example, it points out that in case of India, we have now achieved replacement levels, right? So again, in case of India also, if let's say the replacement rate is 2.1, India has already achieved that. But China achieved this thing 30 years back, right? So typically we compare India and China, but look at the difference between India and China. China achieved something 30 years back. India is achieving that right now. Now, if you look at life expectancy, forget about the life expectancy in the last 2 years because again, you had pandemic, again, a lot of people died. So again, don't consider that. Maybe consider the life expectancy before pandemic. So in case of India, whatever life expectancy was there before the pandemic, China had already achieved that 20 years back. So think of it, right? So now in China, life expectancy will be even more, right? People will tend to survive for even a longer duration. So life expectancy in India at the point is 11 years less than the life expectancy of the Chinese. So Chinese people, on average, they survive for 11 years more. If you look at the child mortality rates, those who are in the age category 0 to 5. Among them, what is the mortality rate? Child mortality rate in India is 4 times the child mortality rate in China. Child mortality rate, CMR, right? So those who are in the age category 0 to 5 years, among them, what is the mortality rate? So how many children are not likely to survive for more than 5 years? That is the child mortality rate. So in case of India, it is 4 times that of China. So the point here is, see, like many times we compare India with China, but if you look at different socio-economic indicators, different health indicators specifically, China is way ahead of India. So things that India is achieving right now, China has achieved 20 years back, for 30 years back. Now what about the future? What is going to happen? So whatever gap is there between India and China in terms of population, that is going to increase. And it's something that we saw on the graph as well, right? So India's population will increase for some time, and after that, it is going to decrease. But China's population has already started decreasing. In fact, its population growth rate has been 0 for some time, and the population growth rate will basically reduce, right? Minus 0.5% by 2045, and its population growth rate will become minus 1% by 2060. So for some time now, it was not growing. It will actually start dipping per year, minus 0.5% per year, minus 1% per year. So population will go down. In case of India, that is not going to decrease. You have a large population, your population growth rate will decrease, but population will increase. Right? So whatever is the population growth rate, it is going to decrease as compared to the population growth rate that was in the past. But population will tend to grow. So that's the difference. So as a result of what will happen, the difference between India's population and China's population is going to increase for some time now. Apart from that, look at fertility rates in China. So in 2022, China attained the lowest ever fertility rate, 1.2 children per woman. And this fertility rate is not going to rebound. At the max, it will become 1.5 children by the end of 21st century. That's the only thing. And if you look at India's population, India will have growth in population for the next 40 years for sure. And by 2050, difference between India's and China's population will be somewhere around 35 crores. By 2100, India's population is most likely going to be 2 times that of China's population. Right? So again, some estimates say that India's population will be around 1.5 billion something, and China's population will be somewhere around 750 million by the end of the 21st century. So these are some numbers which give you a picture how things will look like. And again, what you can do is you can go to the website populationpyramid.net, and there you can make these projections as well. That particular website has different kinds of models, and if you just enter country's name and a year, they can give you an estimate how population will look like. So maybe you can just go to populationpyramid.net, that website, populationpyramid.net, and you can look at some of these numbers. Right? For 2050, what is going to be India's population, what is going to be China's population in 2100? I think you will not get the data for 2100, you'll get the data for 2099. I think it's still 2099 when you get the website. You can look at that, you can play around in that website, and you'll get some of these interesting stats. Now, what are some of the other findings of this world, or what are some of the important recommendations or key findings in this world population prospect report? So what they're saying is, global growth rate of population is now slightly less than 1% per year, and this is happening for the first time since 1950. So global growth rate of population is slightly less than 1%, and for the first time ever since 1950s we're having this. Right? We never had this low global population growth rate. So does that imply the population is going to shrink over a period of time? No, population is not going to shrink. Population is going to increase. What will happen is, if you look at the entire world, there will be some places where you will have more young people. So These are the places where population is going to increase. Some places are the young clusters. For example, India will be one of those places, right? Even though the population growth rate has gone down, but you have young population, and again they will be producing and they will have kids. The population will grow. India is just one example. Look at the sub-Saharan Africa region. Right? Again, it has young population. So here again, population is going to increase. Nigeria is one of those places. Right? It has decently large population, young population, and here also the population will increase. So what is going to happen is some places where you have these young cluster of young people, their population will increase. Now there is this tendency of having different kinds of knee-jerk reactions. Sometimes you will find politicians coming up with different kinds of policies, or sometimes they will suggest that we should have policies so that we can control our population. And usually these policies are of a specific nature, right? So what these policies will be? These policies will punish someone. They will disincentivize someone from having more kids. For example, let's say a particular law says that if you have more than 2 kids, you will not be allowed to participate in the local elections, right? You cannot hold different kinds of positions in panchayat institutions and local bodies, or different kinds of benefits that you get from different schemes. You will not be entitled for that. So these are all different kinds of coercive measures. If you are having more than 2 kids, you will not be entitled to multiple benefits, different kinds of entitlements. Sometimes politicians might come up with these kind of knee-jerk reactions, right? So they might suddenly be worried that population is increasing at this pace, we need to do something about it. But this report actually points out that see, whatever we have achieved till now, serious, for the first time ever, our population growth rate, the world population growth rate has been less than 1%. And this has not necessarily been achieved through all these legislations, through all these knee-jerk reactions. Rather, it has been achieved through consistent investments in multiple things. For example, investments in education, investments in healthcare, nutrition, vaccination, all these things, they have played a very significant role in reducing the population growth rate. So instead of having these kind of random legislations, knee-jerk reactions, governments, states should typically focus on these things. Now, why do you say this, right? Why do you think education, nutrition, vaccination, all these things are important? If you look at the approaches that were used to arrive at population stabilization, in the initial years, right? In India also that was the case, 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, the focus was on ensuring sterilization. Focus was on different kinds of incentives and disincentives. So if someone goes for sterilization, they will be given some form of rewards, right? Maybe cash benefits or something they will be provided. And if someone is not going for sterilization, maybe some form of disincentives can be there. So these kind of measures were used. But then over a period of time, you're realizing that you're achieving these targets. Right? People are getting sterilized. The number of people going for sterilization is increasing, but not necessarily there is much impact on outcomes, on population growth. And then it was realized that there are a bunch of factors which have a bearing on population growth, which have a bearing on fertility rates. One of the major factors here is the health status of the population. If you have better public health situation, the mortality rate should be less. If the mortality rate is less, what happens? It has an impact on the fertility rates. If the probability of people dying is less, the probability of infants dying is less, the probability of children dying is less, what happens? Parents are now more confident. They know that if they have 2 kids, these 2 kids will survive. If the public health situation is not good, the nutritional outcomes are not good, there is no access to drinking water facility, there is no access to proper nutrition, there is no access to proper sanitation facility, vaccination is not there. So different kind of diseases will be there. And if someone has a disease, the ability to fight against the disease is also compromised. So mortality rate should be high, infant mortality rate should be high, child mortality rate should be high. So to hedge against this risk, parents will go for more number of kids. They know that if they have 2 kids, maybe these 2 kids will not even survive 5 years. Maybe they will die. So what parents will do? They will go for maybe 5 kids, maybe they will go for 6 kids, because they have already assumed that 1 or 2 kids will not survive. They'll have more number of kids. So when you're investing in all these things, education, nutrition, vaccination, disease prevention, it improves the public health situation and it acts like a feedback and it reduces the fertility rate. And apart from that, women empowerment is also very important. Right? So if women are empowered, they're going to schools, they're going to colleges, they're going for their education, they're completing their education, they're going for jobs. Now, the role that is envisaged for women changes. Women are independent, financially independent. They take their own decisions. The decision to have a child, they have a say over there. As compared to the situation where they're not independent, they might get exploited many times, especially in traditional societies. The decision to have a child might not be their own. The husband, the in-laws, they might be taking the call. So as women's position becomes better, child marriages will go down. The number of childbirth will also go down. The female is working somewhere. She can't afford to have like 6, 7 kids. So all these things has a bearing on the fertility rate, right? All these things have a bearing on the population growth rate. So the World Population Prosperity Report also talks about that, right? Whatever you have achieved, it is because of all these things. So don't go for some form of political legislation, some form of knee-jerk reaction. Right? Rather, the focus of the state should be on these things. Now, in case of India, what are some of the things that might be required? At this point of time, when it comes to population, one thing that is very important is we don't have the right kind of statistics. Almost every 10 years, we used to have a census, which used to give us an idea about our population numbers. And it's not just the total size of the population, but you also got an idea about multiple other demographic parameters. But for the first time ever, we don't have, I mean, for a long time, we are having it, but this time we don't have that census. And if you do not have a census or you do not have these kind of data, in the future, right, how will you make policies? Ideally, you should make policies on the basis of data. That is very important. But if you're not having something like a census, right, keep in mind that census is one of the best kind of data sets. So whenever you collect data, if you have a large sample, you'll get better data, right? It will be more representative of the actual population. And census is one of those large samples which is representative of the population. So this is something which is a cause of concern. Maybe because of pandemic, this thing was not carried out. But keep in mind that there were some other countries which carried out these exercises despite the pandemic. Not only census, another thing, the civil registration system, that also remains deficient. We do not have a very good idea about multiple things, birth rates, death rates, and all these things. So this is something that we need to improve on. And I have also brought a comment here. It's not just about population statistics, right? We need to have better statistics across multiple sectors, right? We don't have a very good idea about our employment situation right now. Right? We don't have a very good employment data. Maybe we need to focus on that. When it comes to poverty, again, we don't have any official poverty estimates since the Rangajan Committee, which was somewhere around 2000 and 2012. So we need to collect those data as well. Only data set, recent data set that is kind of representative is the National Family Health Survey data that we got recently, right? 2021 November December we got that data. But apart from that, we need statistics for multiple things, and some of these things are not there. We need to focus on that. So population data is important. Now, something about India's population policy. So what we do is 2 things. We will try to see what has been India's approach, what are some of the major things that India did when it comes to population, and one of the major initiatives that we had, we'll talk about that. And then we will try to evaluate, right? So this is what we're going to do for the next 5 minutes or so. So when it comes to population, India was the first country in the world to have a national family planning program. So after independence, after independence in 1950s, at that point of time, none of the countries world over had a national level family planning program. India had a national family planning program in 1952. And at this point of time, the focus was on providing access to medical healthcare and to contraceptives. And that was the major focus in 1952. Then in 1976, emergency, the government of India came up with the first national population policy. And there were different kinds of harsh measures employed at this point of time during emergency. There were allegations of gross violation of human rights. Right? People were forcefully sterilized. Those kind of allegations were there. And in some cases, there were even riots. But apart from that, time to time, India has organized different camps for people to get sterilized. Different kinds of incentives have been given if you do sterilize. So all these things have been going on. But keep in mind that in 1976 you're coming up with the national population policy and you're going for all these harsh measures. Despite that, the population is not getting stabilized. In fact, in 1970s, 1980s, the population growth rate was among the highest. From 90s and 2000s, the population growth rate came down. So you are trying to achieve the outputs, but you are losing out on the outcomes. This is what happened. And many times you say that India suffers from targetitis. That was happening. You are suffering from the disease of targetitis. You are just fixated with targets. You try to meet those targets, but the result is something else. Right? You achieve the targets, but what was the larger outcome? You are not able to achieve that. This is what happened back then. But over a period of time, India changed its approach. Instead of just focusing on targets, it started understanding what are the root causes for the issue. Why India has a large population, and why the population is growing at a fast pace. And then it started addressing these issues. And you observe that the 2000 National Population Policy has many of these things. Right? Has policy solutions to some of these root causes. It focused on what was called as reproductive and sexual health. Now, what is this reproductive and sexual health? It is referred to as RSH. So the idea here is people should have freedom. People should have liberty. They should be able to exercise their choice. There might be some couples who want to have children, right? Who want to reproduce. Now, if there's a couple who wants to have children, they should have access to all the different kinds of reproductive health services. Like, for example, the female should have access to different kinds of information. On top of that, the female who's pregnant should have access to nutrition, she should have access to health checkups, she should be able to deliver in proper healthcare institutions. After delivery, the child should be able to access different kind of vaccination facilities, the female should get different kind of care and attention, the child should get different kind of care and attention. So all these things are part of reproductive health. This ensures that the mother as well as the child, they're healthy. So this is called reproductive health. But apart from that, there will also focus on sexual health. If a couple wants to engage in sexual activities, right? So they don't want to have a child. So they should also be able to experience that. They should also be able to enjoy that. And for that, they will need different kinds of information, different kinds of services that should also be provided. Access to information, access to contraceptives, access to different kinds of information so that STIs, RTIs, sexually transmitted infections, reproductive tract infections, all these things can be avoided, all these things can be managed, and also they're protected from different kinds of diseases like AIDS. So sexual health includes that. So 2000, the National Population Policy that came up, that was initiated, it had all these dimensions. It focused on reproductive health as well as sexual health. So this is how our population policies have changed over a period of time, right? And let's try to look at some of the components of the National Population Policy of 2000. What are some of the features? Maybe relevant, right? Maybe some of these points can be relevant. So let's look at the points, and you should be able to appreciate how population policy is not only talking about contraceptives, it's also talking about host of other things. Let's look at these points. So National Population Policy is saying that we should try to ensure that school education is free and compulsory up to the age of 14 years. Also, we should try to reduce dropout rates among boys and girls. It is a population policy. And why is it talking about education and all? But keep in mind, National Population Policy also implies that you have to get the best out of the population. Your population is your resource. How do you leverage that? A population which is educated, right? So it is an asset. So that's what they're trying to do. So in 2000, they're saying that we need to ensure that children have education till the age of 14 years, and it should be free and compulsory. Ensure that the dropout rates go down. In case of India, the dropout rates tend to be high. We have already seen that, right? When we discuss about education, we see how the dropout rates are high, and the dropout rates continue to increase, right? With increasing rates, right? Those who are in the fifth standard, among the dropout rates will be highest compared to those who are in the first standard. Those who are in the eighth standard, among the dropout rates will be higher than those who are in the fifth standard. Right? So you have to address that. Just appreciate later on you had Right to Education Act, which is kind of continuation of this. Right to Education Act says this, right? Those who are in the age of 14 years should have access to free and compulsory education. Next thing they're saying is you have to reduce the infant mortality rates, you have to reduce the maternal mortality rates, right? So these are all some of the targets. In fact, whatever targets you had at that point of time, this is 2000. All these targets are for 2010, but yeah, most of these targets are not achieved by 2010. In fact, now you will find that some of these targets have been achieved. Apart from that, they're saying you should have universal immunization. So again, trying to ensure that you have better public health situation. Right? So children have access to vaccination, different kinds of preventable diseases, they will not succumb to that. Delayed marriage for girls. Right? If girls are getting married at a younger age, the chance of they becoming pregnant is quite high at an early age, and the number of pregnancies can also increase, right? Fertility rate also increases. So encourage delayed marriage of girls and try to have 80% institutional deliveries, which I have already achieved right now. And all deliveries should be by trained persons. Even if you're not having institutional delivery, the delivery should be carried out by a trained person. 100% registration of pregnancies, births, deaths, marriages, so that have data with you. Universal access to different kinds of information, counseling services, contraceptives, etc. Right? So access to sexual health services and manage reproductive infections, sexually transmitted infections, prevention of spread of AIDS. And all these things are part of the National Population Policy. So as you can observe, the reproductive health services, sexual health services, everything is here. Right? These things, institutional deliveries, part of reproductive health services. These things are part of sexual health services. And apart from that, some other mechanisms so that you are able to utilize your population to the best. Right? You're able to build capacity of the population. So all these things are part of the National Population Policy. And at this point also, if you observe, we don't have any population control measures as such. What we're doing, we're having multiple policies. We're having policies for education, some of the Shiksha Abhiyan, right to education, etc. When it comes to healthcare, again, government has different kinds of mechanisms by which they try to promote health. Ayushman Bharat or having health and wellness centers, all these things that they're trying to promote health. Apart from that, you are building infrastructure, you are trying to provide nutrition, you have immunization schemes, immunization all these things. They're trying to ensure, indirectly maybe, they're all trying to ensure that your population growth rate, right, is stabilized. So you don't have any specific population control measure, but you have multiple schemes which are all trying to ensure development. And keep in mind, development is the best kind of contraceptive. If you have social development, population can get stabilized. So this is about population and different kinds of measures India has taken and where we are heading right now. Yes, we have large population. Yes, India is going to exceed China's population, but that might not be a cause of concern, or that might not be a cause of alarm, because India's population growth rate has been consistently declining. If you look at the growth rates in the last 2 decades, it has consistently declined. India has also achieved replacement levels, right? So India's fertility rates are less than 2.1 right now. So one question here, the United Nations World Population Prospects reveals that Indian population will surpass Chinese population by next year. In this background, evaluate the success of national population policy. Is there a need to bring a new population policy, right? So evaluate the national population policy of 2000, which you can easily do. I already mentioned the steps and how it has actually led to results, how our population growth rate has consistently declined. Do you need a new population policy? May not be required. Already the fertility rates have gone down. Already your population has kind of stabilized. Growth rates have consistently declined. What can be the cause of concern is certain pockets in India. There are certain places in India where fertility rates tends to be high, right? UP, Bihar, the fertility rates tends to be high. Maybe you should have some focus on these states, but again, population control policies. That you should have 2 children, more than 2 children will be penalized. Those kind of mechanisms might not work. There's a massive correlation between population growth and social development. The focus should be on improving the performance of these regions in terms of social factors, right? Better healthcare facilities, better education facilities, better public situation. All these things can lead to reduction in fertility rates. That should be the major goal, rather than having all these stringent measures. So this is how we can answer this particular question.